Hello, everyone. This is Jim Blackburn, and I want to welcome you to an exciting new episode of my podcast, Grit Stories of Resilience. Today, we feature the wild horses of Currituck, who have been on the Outer Banks for at least 500 years. They have been here before the first English settlers, the birth of Virginia Dare, and even the Wright Brothers and the learning of flight. More specifically, I want to welcome Meg Puckett here today to tell us about her friends, the wild horses themselves. Meg joined the Corolla Wild Horse Fund in July of, 2016 as the herd manager for the wild horses of the Outer Banks of Currituck. She has previously worked for the Virginia Zoo in Norfolk, the Museum of the Albemarle in Elizabeth City, and a graduate of Virginia Wesleyan College with a degree in history and English, having studied public history. And she has cared for horses for more than 20 years. Meg, thanks for being here today.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
You are the first person, other than one other person I know who's my daughter, who has studied public history.
Yeah, it's not a too common of a field, but it's a very exciting one and a good one.
So. Well, I've asked Stacy at least 50 to 75 times what public history is, and she has told me every time patiently what she thinks it is and what she believes it to be, and I can never understand it. So there we go. But anyway, welcome here today.
Thank you.
Tell me about the wild horse. When you say the wild horses of Currituck, what are we talking about? What do we mean by that?
Sure. Yeah, no. So we're talking about the banker horses that live wild here in North Carolina. Their banker is their breed. So that's when we call them banker horses or banker ponies. That's what we're referring to is the breed that they are. And we have the herd here in Corolla that numbers about 100 that live on about 7,600 acres of mixed use land up on the Outer Banks of Currituck County. And then there's another herd of the same type of horse down at Shackleford near Beaufort and Cape Lookout area. And they have about 120 horses down there. So those are the only two places left in the world that you can see these horses still in the wild. They used to roam the entire Outer Banks. So from up into Virginia, into Sandbridge, Virginia Beach, all the way down to South Carolina. They used to roam all up and down the Outer Banks, but now with development and roads and all that kind of stuff, they've kind of been pushed to the extreme ends of the barrier islands. So now those are the only two places left that you can see them as they used to exist 500-600 years ago.
Are the wild horses that are on Shackleford, are they related to the wild horses where you are?
They are, yeah. So they are the same breed of horse. They are, they are of different family lines, so they do have more diverse genetics. They're not directly related to the horses here in Corolla, but they are the same strain, the same type of horse. So, and that's one of the things that we're working on right now, is to see if we can determine exactly how they're related, or how they're not related, and what breeds came together to make this kind of horse and everything, and how closely related the two strains at Corolla and Shackleford are or are not. But yeah, they are the same breed.
You say that they used to roam the whole Outer Banks, and they don't now because of advancement in roads and population. Did the roads presented a hazard to them particularly?
Absolutely. I mean, it started with during the Depression when the WPA came in, the Civilian Conservation Corps came in and started building dunes. And so that was kind of the first nail in the coffin for the free roaming of any kind of livestock here on the Outer Banks. As they started building the dunes, they wanted free roaming livestock fenced in so that they didn't damage the dunes. And so in the 1930s, there were fence laws that were put into place so that you couldn't let your cattle, your horses, whatever, roam around. And they actually put a bounty on the horses. And so I've never been able to dig down deep enough and figure out how many horses were taken, for the bounty. But that was kind of the beginning of the end for free roaming livestock here. And so that was in the 30s when they started to get contained. That's when the ochre coat ponies were fenced in down there. And so, then that was kind of the beginning of development here on the beach. And so you started to see paved roads. And for us in Corolla, it was really starting in about the late 80s into the early 90s when the road up into Corolla was paved, is when we started to have major issues with horses being hit by cars. The speed limit was 60 miles an hour and it was a paved road. And, there were at least 20 horses that were hit and killed by vehicles, in the span of about 10 years or so. And so that was kind of when the Wild Horse Fund was started by concerned citizens who kind of came together and said, look, if we don't do something, there's not going to be horses left here in Corolla. And that really started because of the paved road.
How do you protect the horses now in Corolla or the Outer Banks from being hurt by cars or wandering onto the road from somewhere? How do you do that?
It's a challenge. I mean, so where they live now, so in 1996, there was a fence that was built that goes from the ocean over to the Sound, and it's right at the end of the paved road. And all the horses that were living south of that fence where the paved road is at that point in the 90s were relocated up to where they're north of the fence and off the paved road. Excuse me. But there's still vehicle traffic up on the sand roads. Of course, nobody's going 60 miles an hour, but you hit a horse at 35 miles an hour and it's still going to do some damage, can still absolutely kill a horse. So it's definitely still a threat. It's not quite as much of a threat as it was when they were roaming up and down the paved road, all the way from Corolla down into Duck. How do you control it? You really can't. You can't control the horses. We can't tell the horses to watch out for vehicles. They're pretty savvy. Just they're pretty good about avoiding vehicles. But we have lost horses to being hit and killed over the years. It definitely still does happen. And every once in a while we'll have a group that goes around the fence there at the end of the road onto the paved road in Corolla. And we have a group of volunteers that live in the neighborhood there that help us get them moved back to the onto the 4x4 where they're a little more safe. But it's a constant challenge.
Well, it must be. How many horses do you look after now? What's the number?
So there's about 100 horses up in the wild on the 4x4. And then we have here at our farm in Grandy, we have 23 horses that live on the farm here on the mainland that were removed from the wild for, whatever reason, whether it was a medical issue, habituation, things like that. So if you include all of those, it's about 123 banker horses that the Wild Horse Fund manages on a daily basis.
When you say a banker horse, that's a particular breed, are there any particular things that a person would notice about a banker horse? Are they in terms of the size or something like that?
Yeah, absolutely. So their physical characteristics, they're all, they're small. They look like ponies, but genetically they are actually horses. You'll hear people say banker horse and banker pony. They've been called banker ponies for, 100 years. So it's kind of like, a lot of times people still call their full-grown dogs their puppies. It's kind of similar to that. But genetically they are horses. But yeah, they have developed adaptations over the years that help them survive here. They have very wide feet that are kind of shaped like pancakes a lot of the time, and that helps them get through the sand a lot like a snowshoe would. They are a lot of them have one less lumbar vertebrae than you see in a lot of domestic horses. That's kind of hard to get an exact number on because you can only tell that either once the horse is gone or if you do an MRI, but we have found that in the herd, which is quite rare. That's a very primitive characteristic that you see in very old breeds. They tend to have very narrow chests. They have a very low set tail. Many of them do look quite Spanish when you compare them to other horse breeds that we know originated from other Spanish type horses that were either developed in Spain or in Central and South America. And so you see a lot of the head shape, for example. You see a very convex head in some of them, and that's a very Spanish characteristic. But they've also developed behavioral adaptations over the years that really set them apart from other horses. They're problem solvers. They think very critically, which you don't often see in a lot of modern domestic breeds. Horses are prey animals, so they tend to run, or panic when they are in a situation that could be, dangerous or cause them harm, whereas these horses will stop and think about it, before they panic, before they hurt themselves more. They're very good at getting themselves out of tricky situations. And that also sets them apart. They are what we call a land race breed, which means it's a breed of domestic animal that developed in a particular region, and that has cultural ties to that region, and has also developed physical characteristics based on the area where they live, specific to where they live. And so that's something that really sets these horses apart too.
You mentioned Spanish looking horses.
Mm-hmm.
What is the relationship, if any, of these horses to Spain?
Well, so we're working on that. We know that these horses were originally, the original stock was brought here. They were brought here by the Spanish. We have historical and also DNA evidence of that. So that's not really questioned anymore. We know that that's where they came from. But coming from Spain and being Spanish are two very different things, right? And so one of the things that we're working on right now I'm sorry, one second. I am sorry. I just got a text message from someone up on the beach. So, but we're good.
Okay.
Edit that out. This is a day in the life of me. My phone is constantly
Well,
ringing.
I know. Well, we're gonna come
problem or another.
Before we're through today, I want to talk about a day in your life.
Yeah. Okay. We can get back to genetics now. It's not an emergency, so that's good. So what we're doing now through DNA, we're working with geneticists, and as we collect DNA from all of the horses in the herd, we're trying to figure out exactly what the origins of this breed were. We suspect that there was a lot of influence from breeds that would have been found in like Northern Africa and in Europe. And so that's one of the things we're working on, what exactly makes up these horses. What we see in the DNA now is that a lot of the breeds that they are most closely related to are breeds that are found in Central and South America now. And what that tells us, what that confirms, is that the Spanish did bring these horses over here to begin with, but they set up breeding farms in Central and South America. And so once they were established there, the Spanish would sail over, they would pick up horses at these breeding farms and then bring them up the coast that way. And there was a very thriving horse trade, well through the colonial period and really into the early 1900s, or I'm sorry, early 1800s. Where these horses were moving up and down the coast quite a bit. And then what we have left here in North Carolina are, the ones that were not deeply influenced by other breeds. We have the horses that are still genetically as close as possible to the horses that were originally brought here, because they were not interbred with more modern breeds.
I read somewhere in getting ready for today's talk with you that there was some legend also, in addition to coming up the coast, of horses being in shipwrecks in the Atlantic and swimming to shore. Is that, and some of them survived and some did not. How much truth is there to that?
I think that there's probably a kernel of truth. Any legend or lore, things like that, it starts from somewhere, right? So we do know that there were ships that were off the coast that had horses in them that probably did run aground on the sandbars here. And the first thing that you're going to do when you're trying to get your ship off of a sandbar is get rid of the heaviest stuff. So there probably were cases where horses, other livestock were tossed overboard, so that they could get the ship off the sandbar. Was that how the Outer Banks was populated with horses? No, it wasn't. But I always say that that's such an important part of our history here, on the Outer Banks, is that the legend and the lore and the stories are just as important as the actual scientific and historical facts. They're so interwoven with each other, and it's important to kind of understand how they're different, and how the legend is not necessarily the whole truth, but you can't discount it. I always use Blackbeard as an example. We all know that Blackbeard probably didn't swim around the ship 6 or 7 times after his head was cut off, but that's still an important part of the story. It's still part of the story that we tell. Same thing as the Lost Colony. We know what happened to the Lost Colony. There's really not, that much historical debate over what most likely happened to the Lost Colony, but that doesn't make the play and the story any less significant to our history. And so I think that's very much the case with these horses too, is that legend and that romance and that history is an important part of their story, and we don't want to discount that.
Before there was a wild horse fund, and people like you and a farm to look after horses that were hurt, they somehow survived. How did they survive in the wild, when before there were any settlers who were trying to look after them or people who were trying to protect them? How did they manage to adapt and survive over the hundreds of years, do you think?
It's a great question. So, first and foremost, the thing to remember now is that there's a lot more people. And, the majority of the situations we have where we're intervening have to do with people, have to do with encroachment. And so, that didn't exist that a long time ago. We're talking very, very recent history where we've had so many people that have access to these horses. So that's the biggest issue, first and foremost. And also back then, so National Geographic was here in the 1920s. They did a big article on the Outer Banks, and there's a brief little mention in that article that they say that there were between 5,000 and 6,000 horses across the entire Outer Banks back then, from top to bottom. So we also had a lot more horses. So if you lost 1 or 2 or 10, or at that point even 50 to something, that's not going to take a huge toll on the overall herd. But now that we're down to 100 horses, and not only are we trying to keep a wild population on the beach, but we're very much focused on breed conservation as well. And so with a smaller population like that, when you lose 1 horse, that does significant damage to the long-term survival as far as genetic diversity and genetic health of the herd. And so it's much more important now that we really focus on every individual. Every single individual in this herd is critically important to the overall survival. Whereas back when there were a lot more horses and far fewer people and more area for them to roam around in, that was a little less critical. But they're also just really good at taking care of themselves. I think that for the most part, if we just leave them alone, they're pretty good at taking care of themselves.
How do they do that? How do they do? How does a horse take care of himself?
They've just learned over the years how to do it. These horses are so incredibly hardy and smart, and so well adapted to their environment that they just, I always say that, like, their number one skill is survival. That is the thing that they are the best at, is surviving. And 90% of the time, if we just leave them alone to survive, they will. So they're just really good at it.
Where do they find food on the Outer Banks?
So they're seasonal grazers, so they're going to go to where the food is. So, right now, we have the grass on the dunes is coming in, the sea oats are coming in. So you see horses grazing on the dunes a lot. There's grass back behind the dunes, in people's yards and things like that. So they're going to graze there. The marsh right now is just as green as it can be. So you'll see horses out in the marsh. They'll be, up to their shoulders in water, and they graze on the grasses that grow there in the water. In the wintertime, they forage on pretty much anything they can find. We don't have extremely cold winters here, and so there is pretty much food all year round for them. We don't do any kind of supplemental feeding, and they have adapted to survive on far fewer calories than what you would expect from most normal horses. And that's actually one of the biggest challenges of keeping them in a domestic setting, is not overfeeding them. We here at the farm, we don't have lush pastures. We don't have green grass for them, because that would not be good for them. In the wild, they don't have that kind of forage, and so they're very good at surviving on low calories and pretty rough forage out there.
What do you think their future is long term on the Outer Banks? Do you see them growing in numbers from 100, or do you see it stabilizing? Do you see it going down? How do you see that?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I mean, I wish I had a crystal ball to be able to say for
Yeah.
sure. But, I know first and foremost, we have to maintain a wild population of these horses here. If they do not stay wild, they will not be what they are. Being wild and living in that environment is what makes them banker horses. And so if they're not there anymore, even if we have horses here on the farm that we're breeding and we're trying to preserve the breed, eventually those adaptations that they've developed over the centuries are going to be gone, because they won't have to use them anymore. So it's really, really important that from just a breed conservation standpoint, that we maintain a wild population of horses, and from a cultural standpoint too. I mean, these horses, they're the state horse of North Carolina. They are a cultural icon, and so it's really important that we maintain that wild herd. But there's a lot of challenges to that. I mean, we've got, increase in development and increase in visitation. We have more and more people coming to the area where they live every single year. We have environmental challenges. We're facing climate change. We're facing, water that's not very healthy anymore. So there's a lot that goes into keeping them wild. So and that's one of the things that the Wild Horse Fund is here for, to examine habitat preservation. What can we do to preserve habitat? What can we do to take habitat out of development and save it for the horses and other wildlife? And then also breed conservation, is the work that we're doing with DNA. The more we know about these horses, the more we know about their ancestry and their genetics, and kind of what makes them tick, the better we're going to be, set up to save them and to keep them here.
Do you, in your job, do you get to know the individual horses at all? Do you know one from another, besides the way they look? Do you give them names? Do they have personality traits?
Yep,
That sort of
absolutely they
thing.
do. Yeah, they do, and again, there's that fine balance there between, they're wild animals, and so you have to keep that at the forefront of your mind all the time. You have to treat them like wild animals. At the same time, there's 100 of them. There's not that many, and yeah, we do know them. You get to know especially the ones that are most visible, that are out and about for the ones that we see the most. You do get to know them. You get to know their personalities and everything. We do name them. The horses here at Corral have been named for pretty much all of recorded history. They've always had names. That's how they've been managed. They also have registration numbers. So every single wild horse has a file with us. And so in that file, there are going to be photos. There's going to be any information about the horse that we have, like DNA, all that kind of stuff, any vet records we may have of them. Their name, and then also their registration number. The reason we name them is because it's just easier to talk about them that way. Is we're out in the field working, it's a lot easier to remember that this is Hazel and not Mare 74387 or whatever her number is. So that's primarily why we name them. But yeah, so we keep track of every single horse. There are certainly horses out there that live way deep in the marsh, that we don't see often or at all. But for the most part, we do have record of every single horse out here.
Are there any horses that over the years, and even today, that you've gotten more close to than others, that you know better than others, and have stories about any of them?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I always tell people that in this kind of work, animal rescue, wildlife management, zoos, whatever, if you don't get emotional and attached, like you're probably in the wrong field or you need to take a break because you're burnt out. I mean, you have to have some kind of emotional attachment because you have to care enough to want to take care of them and advocate for them and everything. And so yeah, I always say, like, I know I shouldn't have favorites, but you do end up with favorites. Absolutely. Especially when you spend so much time with them, it's impossible not to. And so yeah, and I think all of us that work with them definitely have our favorite horses for sure. I think as far as individuals, for me, the foals that have been born since I've been with the fund are always, extra special to me when you know a foal from day one. That's definitely an attachment there. And then there's just some that I don't know. It's hard to say like why some of them you get more attached to than others. It just kind of happens, whether it's their personality or just the way they look. Sometimes you're just, wow, I love the chestnut horses, the horses with chestnut, the horses with lots of white markings on them. I'm always more drawn to them for whatever reason. So
Who names them?
so some of them already have had names, forever. I inherited files with names on them, and so we keep them. It's superstitious the superstition is that it's bad luck to change a horse's name once it's been named. So we don't change it once it's been named. Some of them get named by locals, by residents, or a lot of times by tour drivers. They'll call them by a certain name, and so if the horse doesn't already have a name in our files, we'll just stick with that. Some of them have multiple names, and so in their file, if we call them one thing, but the tour drivers call them something else, and then the residents call them something else, we'll make a note of all of those names. I always tell people the horses don't care what their name is, so you can call them whatever you want. But if there is a second name that we hear a lot, we'll make a note of it just so we know who they're talking about if they call us about something. And then starting in 2020, we started naming the foals in alphabetical order, and that just helps us keep track of ages a little bit better. So we started in 2020 with A, and so we're on D names this year. And for the most part, I pick the foal names just because it's something that I don't know, it's just a little thing that I can kind of keep to myself, and it makes me happy. And so this year we're on D, and we've been trying to pick names that are related to nature and other animals this year. So
What's the average lifespan of a banker horse?
So if they, live their full life without any incident, without any injuries or anything like that might hurt them, they can live well into their 20s. We kind of, before we really started digging into the DNA and the ancestry, we assumed that like late 20s was really old for a wild horse. We have found several individuals in the herd that are well into their 30s and still going strong. So they can live a long time. Here on the farm or in a domestic setting, once they're receiving regular veterinary care and good nutrition, and they get their teeth floated every year and things like that, they can live to be 40. We had a stallion here that was rescued when we thought that he was probably in his like early 20s when he was rescued, but he was actually probably much older than that. And then when he died, we think that he was probably close to 40 years old. And that's one of the things that we found with these horses. You age a horse based on their teeth. You can look at their teeth and usually tell about how old they are. What we found with these horses is their teeth age differently than domestic horses, and so they'll be kind of normal until they reach maturity at about 5 or 6. And then after that, you look at the teeth of a grown horse, and with one of these guys, you can usually add 5+ years to what you think the age of their teeth is telling you. So that's again something we've just learned as we pull horses off the beach, or as we look at horses that are deceased and we can get a good look at their teeth. That's one of the interesting things that we've found in recent years.
I may be mistaken on this, but haven't you had some births recently?
We have, yeah, we're this year we're up to 5 foals so far, which is about normal. In the last couple of years, we've been averaging between 5 and 8 foals per year. And so we're up to 5 this year. We have 3 boys and 2 girls so far.
It's pretty cool.
Yeah.
And so is the public who comes on vacation to the Outer Banks and wants to see these wild horses, what should they do?
Well, so I always tell people, first and foremost, if you want to see them and you want to do it in a safe way, reach out to one of the commercial tour companies. We work really closely with the tour companies. We offer training for their drivers, their guides. We stay in touch with them through the summer. They get weekly updates from me about things that are going on within the herd, updates on horses and things like that. So they are very educated and very connected to us, and they are supportive of the Wild Horse Fund. It's a safe way to get up on the beach and see the horses. They know how to drive the roads. They know where to go. They know where to go that's safe. And it also prevents a lot of extra wear and tear on the beach and the sand roads. So, we always say that everyone who's in the back of one of those tour trucks is not on the beach, in a Jeep by themselves. So that really is the safest and best way to see these horses.
What's a typical day for you? I noticed when we first got started here today that you had a text message about something going on the beach. Is that
Yeah.
a crisis, something you have to attend to? But what's a typical day for you?
I was talking to somebody yesterday about this. That is probably the hardest question I get asked all the time, is what's a typical day like? Because the minute I tell you what a typical day is like, it'll change. So I usually pick a day from whatever week it is that I'm talking to somebody, and will describe that day. So for example, on Tuesday, I left my house, I ran up to the office and switched out of vehicles because I had a truck that needed to go to the shop, drove back over to the mainland, dropped it off at the shop, came over to the farm because we have open houses on Wednesdays. So we had to clean, and we had some hooves that needed trimming and things like that. I had a meeting in the afternoon that I was in the middle of, and my phone rang with one of our staff that was up on the beach, who was with a horse that was in severe distress and discomfort. Sent me a video, and she was rolling around. It looked really bad. So I had to reach out to our vet, and he and I chatted, and he said, I think she needs to either get some pain meds or possibly come to the farm to be seen by him. So I called my coworker, had already left for the day. She was halfway home, and I called her and I said, can you please turn around? I need help. So she came back. We hitched up the trailer. We drove back up to Kerala and got up onto the beach to check out the horse. And thankfully, by the time we got up there, she had seemed to kind of gotten over whatever it was that was causing the discomfort. And we watched her for a while and touched base with the vet again, and all agreed that we could stand down. And so she and I turned around and came home, and got home at about 10 o'clock that night. So is that a typical day? Yeah, kind of. We don't get those major emergency calls every day, but this time of year it's definitely pretty regular. So that was kind of a normal Tuesday for me.
Well, in looking after these horses, if you all were not there, if you all did not exist, how would they manage now with population increasing, uh, people driving fast, all this sort of thing? Do you think if you all were not there to protect them with the fencing and everything, they would come to go away?
Yeah, I don't think I don't, without oversight, they would not be here. So the Wild Horse Fund, we don't manage in a vacuum. We work with U.S. Fish and Wildlife, with Currituck County, and with the state of North Carolina. Those are the biggest stakeholders as far as the property up there. And so we do have an advisory board that meets quarterly, that consists of those entities plus a resident representative from the 4x4 area. We have a management plan that we operate under, and so within that plan, it lays out everything. It lays out everything from habitat preservation to maintaining the fences on either end of the property, or either end of the habitat. rescue and removal, adoptions, if that's appropriate, advocacy, training, signs and PSAs, all of that is laid out within the management plan, as well as population. And so there's a signed population agreement in that plan that's signed by everyone. And that population statement is no less than 110 and no more than 130. We do have, that plan that we kind of operate by. But yeah, I mean, I think that if that was not in place, if we weren't out here, managing on the day-to-day, advocating, and then also working in conjunction with these other stakeholders, I do not think that the horses would still be up there. No.
Is there anything that I have not asked you today that you would like to say to anyone listening to us about the horses, the wild horses?
Well, I think we've touched on a lot. I think that just the thing that I always try to really stress to people is that these horses belong to all of us. We don't own these wild horses. We are just the ones who are lucky enough to be given the access and the permission to manage them and take care of them. And it's something that we don't take lightly. And we are doing it for everyone, and it is very important to keep the horses wild and also keep them accessible. And that takes everybody working together. Every single person who sets foot on that beach is responsible for helping to take care of these horses. And if we don't all work together, it's not sustainable. So it's really important for people who are going to access where these horses live to follow the rules and be respectful and understand that, their actions have consequences, and it's really up to all of us to step up to the plate and keep these horses safe, keep them accessible, and keep them up there. So, I think that it's really important for everyone to be invested in their well-being and the sustainability of the herd.
Oh, I agree. Meg, I can't thank you enough for doing this today. I know you're a busy person with crisis ahead of you before the day is out, more than likely. And I just think and hope that people will listen to this podcast and learn a little bit more about the wild horses, respect them, and come and visit with them and see them.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, I appreciate, you giving me the platform here to talk about them.
Oh, anytime, Chief, anytime. Thank you.